Good morning, men. Great to be with you. The Bible has a lot of people in it, a lot of characters. And out of that whole population of characters, there are a few heroes. And out of the population of heroes that are presented in Scripture, there's a handful that start well and finish well, just a handful. And among those characters is the man Joshua. You know Joshua. You likely know people named Joshua because Joshua was such a hero. But Joshua was the one who, you recall, he was one of the spies that went into the land. He came back with a different report from everybody else. So he comes back and says, we can go into the land. All the rest say, no, we can't do it. Joshua and Caleb come back. They say, we can do it. The nation of Israel listens to the bad report rather than the good report. And so God sends them out into the wilderness to wander for 40 years. Out into the wilderness, even Moses, a hero for the nation of Israel, even he violates God's directive and he hits the rock twice and he's not allowed to go into the land. But out of that whole nation, and so they estimate 2 to 3 million people came out of Egypt. And out of all of that, there were just Joshua and Caleb and everyone who was under age 20 that were able to go into the land. And so Joshua is this amazing person. If you ever are discouraged, if you read the first chapter of Joshua, I think you'll be encouraged. That's when God goes to Joshua and says, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now you take these people into the land that I've promised them. And so here's Joshua. He takes them into the land. They have battles. They go around Jericho and the walls fall. I mean, it's just an amazing time of miracle after miracle after miracle. And Joshua, after all of this, he lives to be about 110 years old. He makes an address to the nation of Israel. And this address is recorded for us in Joshua chapter 24. And this is what he says to the nation of Israel. He says, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt and serve the Lord. That's his directive. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And you've heard that verse many, many times, I'm sure. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And then shortly after this, Joshua dies. These are among the very last words of Joshua. So imagine the life of this faithful man who trusted God. I mean, he was in Egypt. He was born into slavery, Joshua was. He came out of Egypt. He saw all the plagues in Egypt. He saw all of them. Somehow, some way, he was an assistant to Moses. I don't know how he got that status, but he was. And so he was likely either next to Moses or near Moses when he came and went from his meetings with Pharaoh. When they finally got to leave the land, Joshua was there. He walked on the dry ground through the Red Sea. He saw the pillar of fire. He saw the cloud leading the nation of Israel. He saw all of that. He went into the land, spied it out, came out with the faithfulness of a giant, not what everyone else was saying, there's giants in the land. No, Joshua was the faithful giant. And he came out and he said, we can take this, we can do this. Joshua wasn't perfect, and we know that because no man is perfect. But Joshua was this faithful man, and the very last thing that he has to say, not only to the nation of Israel, but he's saying it to us as well. He says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. I don't know if you knew this. This will be a little piece of information you can take with you after today. But the name Joshua and the name Jesus are the same name. I don't know if you knew that. Joshua is in the Hebrew, and Jesus is in the Greek. And so roughly 1,400 years after Joshua, 1,400 years later, the next Joshua comes, the new Joshua. And what does he tell us about serving the Lord? This is Jesus. And this is just after the mother of the sons of Zebedee, James and John. She goes to Jesus and she says, listen, Jesus, if you don't mind, I'd like my sons to sit on either side of you when you sit on your throne in glory. And of course he says, well, it's not up to me to assign those seats. And the others hear the mother pleading for status for her sons. And they become indignant. And this is what Jesus says. He says, he called them all together because he knew that they were grumbling among themselves. They weren't happy with James and John because they probably poked their mother to go, hey, Mom, do you mind go talking to Jesus for us? That's probably the dialogue that happened. So Jesus calls together his disciples, and this is what he says. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So interesting. Here, the first Joshua says, as for me and my household, we're going to serve the Lord. And 1,400 years later, the next Joshua comes, Jesus. And he says, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. And he tells us, he gives us a glimpse of what it's like to live in God's kingdom. He says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And so it's very interesting, that verse. He says, whoever wants to be great must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all, has to serve everybody. And that's why I came. So he tells us how to be great in God's kingdom. Then he shows us. And you know the passage where he washes the disciples' feet. And here he says in John 13, verse 12 or 15, he says, I set an example for you that you should do as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. You'll be blessed if you do them. So what does godly servanthood look like? You know, when Jesus came on the scene, he redefined things for us and for the people in his world. So when Jesus came on the scene, the idea was that if you sinned overtly, that was a sin. But Jesus came and he said, no. If you lust after somebody in your heart, that is a sin. So he redefined sin for us. And I think Jesus also redefines service. Joshua says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Now, I grew up in church, and I heard that phrase, serving the Lord, since I was an infant, probably. My parents were on the mission field when I was born. I was born in South America on the mission field to American missionaries. And so I was raised in church, probably went to church before I would breathe the air. And so I heard this phrase my whole life. And missionaries would come to our church and they'd say, well, we're serving the Lord. And I'm like, well, what are you doing in, Africa or Asia? Well, we're just serving the Lord. And I'd be like, well, first of all, why don't you talk like a human being? And, tell me exactly what you're doing, because I want to know what you're actually doing. I'm like, we're just serving the Lord. And so I have to say, for me, serving the Lord was an innocuous term. It didn't mean much. It didn't mean much. And I suspect that for the 1,400 years between when Joshua said, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord, and Jesus came and actually told them and then showed them what it was, that people really didn't have a handle on it. And honestly, man, I think probably half the people in churches today don't understand what it means to serve the Lord. I bet you half of them don't. I think it's just a friendly term that we throw, at least that was my experience. So what does servanthood look like in Scripture? So I have on your card there, it's a choice. It's a choice. We choose to serve. You don't have to serve. That's the whole thing. You don't have to serve. Now, Jesus did say you must be born again. So there are directives of things that you have to do if you want the Holy Spirit to gain residence in your heart. If you want to become a citizen of heaven, you have to be born again. But Jesus says when he talks about washing each other's feet, he says you should do it. You should do it. And you'll be blessed if you do it. So it's a choice. You don't have to serve the Lord. You really don't. You can get to heaven, you can enjoy heaven, and all of that without serving. So if somebody makes you guilty about serving the Lord, don't let them put that guilt on you. If the guilt comes from the Holy Spirit, that's fine. I remember one time I was at a gas station in Virginia, and I must have had some goofy Christian bumper sticker on my car. I really don't remember what it was, but I was pumping gas in my car, and a woman came up to me, and she says, I have somebody that you can serve. And I don't know, maybe it was before lunch, I was feeling a little snarky that day, but I looked at this woman and I said, well, you know what? Maybe God's calling you to serve this person and not me. And that was it. And I went back to pumping gas and walked away guilt-free. I was guilt-free. I felt no guilt at all about saying that to this woman. So don't let somebody guilt you into serving the Lord. You choose to serve the Lord. That's your choice. Serving the Lord is humbling. I mean, Jesus gave us the example of washing his disciples' feet. I was thinking about what it's a modern day example of washing somebody's feet. I don't know that we have one, but it just assume it is the job of the lowest servant of the household servants. Whatever the bottom rung is, you're the foot washer now, and that guy can't wait till the next guy comes and he can hand that job to somebody else. In James 4, verse 6, it says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Wow. You know, I never want to be opposing God. I mean, that's a little bit of a frightening verse, to imagine that as pride gains in us, that at some time we could be in the status of opposing God. That is a humbling verse. It's sacrificial. And you know the story of the Good Samaritan? I mean, he sees this man who's been robbed and bleeding on the ground, and he picks that man up. He takes him to an inn, and he stays there at the inn. And then the next day he took out 2 denarii, so that's 2 days' wages. So think $200, $400, something like that, whatever it is. However much money you make in a day, times 2. Gave it to the innkeeper and said, look after him. When I return, I'll reimburse you for any additional expenses. If serving the Lord has to be sacrificial, as I was reading the book that we hand out here, I think it's the devotional, The Thoughts of a Desperate Man. Do you guys remember that one? So in there he says, you know, if you give somebody a ride to a place you're already going, that's not serving them. You know, it's got to be sacrificial. It's got to cost you something. If you offer somebody a ride to a place that you're already, you just have company in the car. You're not really serving them. It's got to cost you something. I want to tell you a story about myself. So I don't tell this story very often. I've only told this, I don't know, a handful of times. But for me, kind of service in the church, service in God's kingdom was not normative. Now, if you asked me for help or you asked me for money and it was reasonable, I'd be happy to give it to you. But I never viewed that as actually serving the Lord in my heart. And so one day, I was in my office in New York. I had an office in the corner of the building. So if I was sitting here, out of one window was Broadway. So all of Broadway there. And then the street behind me was Wall Street. So behind me was the entrance to the stock exchange. And so, I've always had a heart bent toward God, but I never knew, how do I actually engage that? How do I engage that? And I've seen the 4 spiritual laws, and I've seen people wrestle people down and say, I'm going to read this tract to you, or something. And that's awesome work. That's evangelism. That's awesome. And I had done some of that, and that's extremely satisfying. But the whole service part, I never really got a good grasp on. And then my mom went to work with the Southern Baptists in West Africa, in the country of Togo. Most of you don't even know where Togo is on the map, but I've been there. I got a stamp in my passport. And but I never wanted to go visit my mom in Togo, because in my mind I'm thinking, all right, if you go, you got to get shots when you go up to the harder areas of Africa. You're likely going to go overnight, so you'll be all jet lagged. There's a good chance when you go there you'll get some kind of stomach thing while you're there. It's just pretty normal for that to happen. But I love my mom, and so I thought, if I call her regularly, like every week, maybe that enough of those phone calls equals a visit in person, was what I had in my mind. So that's what I did. I would call my mom all the time. Hey mom, how's it going in Togo? What's going on in Togo? What are you doing in Togo? And my mom was very sacrificial. She'd go out into the bush areas and put a sheet up on the trees and show the Jesus film, or she'd work in her church there, in her village, and things like that. So one day I called my mom, and we talked for a little bit. Then she said, well, tomorrow I'm going to a prison. And I'm like, oh, okay, now that sounds interesting to me. I see these prison documentaries on TV, and that's a whole culture that is unique and unusual. And so I thought, wow, what does a prison in Africa look like? I mean, that can't be a nice place in my mind, I'm thinking. So I hung up the phone from that phone call, and I called her back the very next day. And I'm like, tell me, how was the prison? What'd you do in the prison? What happened in the prison? And so she described this whole experience that she had in this prison in Togo. And I hung up the phone, and literally the second I hung up the phone, I had this picture in my mind of the prodigal son in rags and everything. And that was the picture that my mom gave me. She said, some guys actually go into the prison, they're in there so long that the clothes that they're wearing disintegrate, and they walk around the prison naked because they don't have clothes. And so I had this picture of the prodigal son. And I thought to myself, all right, that picture is either from me or it's from God. And I need to figure out where this picture has come from. And so I called my mom right back, and she was surprised to hear from me. So I called her back, and I said, hey mom, can you go to the head of the prison there in Togo and ask if we can do a banquet in the prison? This is literally 3 minutes after I hung up the phone. And she said, sure, I'll do that. And so I called her back the next day and said, all right, so what did the guy say? Now, truth be told, in my heart, I am hoping this guy says, no, you can do nothing here. Please leave us alone and go away. That's what I'm hoping for, truthfully. That really is what I was hoping for. And my mom says, well, the guy says, here are the keys, you do whatever you want in this prison in Togo. And I'm like, oh, all right. I think that ball just came back into my court. And honestly, man, I was just, Lord, what do you want? What do you want me to do? What's the deal here? So I called a friend, and this gal worked at a very large church in New York. And I said, hey, do you have somebody, an evangelist, somebody that could go to Togo in West Africa? And so she called me back a few days later, and she said, yeah, I've got a guy, he's in South Africa, but you're gonna have to fly him here. You're gonna have interpreters, You got to take care of his airfares, all of that. And I thought, all right, well, that, to me, in my mind, when something gets too complicated, that's not God, right? That's sort of the world saying, I got a solution. It's not a God solution, but there is an answer. And so I said, well, thanks for researching that, but I don't think I'm going to use that guy. So I called my mom back, and I said, Mom, I've got good news and bad news. I said, the bad news is I cannot get an evangelist to come to West Africa we were going to do a banquet in the prison in the name of the prodigal son. And I said, I can't get somebody to come, but I think God wants me to come. And I literally, I had to push those words out of my mouth. I had to force them out of my mouth. So I'm like, all right, so what do? I went back to scripture. I looked at the story of the prodigal son and the banquet his dad threw for him. And so I called my pastor, and this was the first pastor my wife and I had. His name is Phil, and I said, hey, Phil, I said, do you want to go to Africa with me? Go and do this outreach in a prison over there. And he said, yes, I'll go. I'd love to go. So we got that sort of squared away. We ordered some Bibles for these guys in this prison in West Africa. These were French because they speak French as their colonial language in Togo. We brought T-shirts for these guys, so I ended up with boxes of T-shirts, and on the front of the shirt it had two arms with a broken chain in the middle, and something in French. I forget what we put on, something in French. I sent money to my mom in Africa, and so she got some gals at her church in Togo, and they went to the marketplace and they bought a cow and brought that thing back on a rope from the marketplace, and they made a banquet out of that cow. Now, I don't think anybody in this room is married to a woman who could do that. Honestly, could actually turn that thing into a banquet. And so I am ready to go to Togo, and I think it was a week before I'm ready to go, a week before we leave, I get a call from my pastor, and he says, you can get really sick in Africa. And I said, Phil, what are you saying? He goes, my board won't let me go. And I'm like, I don't think it was your board. I think you told your board, tell me that I can't go, please. And so Phil was out. He got a little bit jittery, still a dear friend. And I happened to be with a guy who at that time was the chaplain for the Arizona Diamondbacks, the baseball team. And he was with me. We were at a conference together, and his name's Don Gordon. I said, Don, do you want to go to Togo? He goes, yes, I'll go to Togo with you. So Don Gordon and I go to Togo, and we land in Togo. I have no idea what to expect when I'm there. And of course, my mom is thrilled that I'm there with her in Togo. And we go to this prison in this little village called Sokode. And I'll tell you, man, it was as if you had stepped into the 1700s. Big wooden doors, iron hardware on all the doors, nothing, there's no clocks, nothing in there electronic. You could have been in the 1700s. So we walk in, and the whole time I'm walking into this prison, I'd never been in a prison before, thank the Lord. But I walk into this prison, and all I'm thinking is, I don't want to touch anything. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to, I'm going to walk in, we're going to do this thing, and then we'll walk out. And I'm walking behind my mom, which tells you a little bit about my courage at that moment in time. And she walks up to the very first inmate that she sees and just shakes this guy's hand. And I'm thinking, now I got to shake this guy's hand, because I'm walking behind her. I'm like, I got to do whatever she does. And I'll tell you what, when I shook the first inmate's hand, my heart just changed completely. And we went in. They had a big, huge kettle that they put this cow into. Found out later that the average Togolese person would eat meat 1 day per year. 1 day a year, they would actually may have meat. And so for these inmates to get actual beef is an amazing thing. So then my friend Don got up and preached. I talked to the inmates as well through interpreters. Then we went to another prison. We handed out these Bibles, and these guys sat in these. So these guys are sleeping on a concrete floor, and that's it. No pillow, no mattress, no nothing. They're just sleeping on a concrete floor. And we go in cell by cell, and I'm handing Bibles to these guys. And they wouldn't even look at me. They just had their heads down, and their hands are kind of shaking, and I'm handing Bibles to each of these guys. And then we get to the last cell to hand these Bibles to, and these guys had learned a Christian hymn in English, which is unusual. And we walk in there, and these guys are singing, "God is so good, he's so good," too, and they just keep singing it. And I'm telling you, when we walked out of these prisons, I was just in tears walking out of these prisons. And I'll tell you what, that experience absolutely changed my life. It changed my life. It changed my life. And it was about 7 years later, and this is another story for another day. About 7 years later, I moved my family to South Africa. And we started doing this prison work down there. And it was amazing. It was amazing. It was a total choice. I did not have to answer the bat phone when it rang. You know, when God calls, you got a choice. You pick up the phone or you don't pick up the phone. You don't have to pick up if you're a believer and your status with God is sealed, you don't have to pick up the phone when he calls. But he tells us that we'll be blessed if we do. And that experience, that one phone call back to my mom saying, "Will you ask the chief of the prison if we could go in and do something in the prison?" That thing changed my life. It absolutely changed my life. And my life is different. My wife's life is different. And I'll promise you, my 3 children, their lives are different because I made that phone call and I answered just that thought, that passing thought that maybe we should do an outreach in this prison. None of that is intended to make you guys feel guilty if you haven't gone and done prison work in Africa. None of that is. None of that is. Because a lot of times when people come to me and say, "Hey, can you do this? Can you do this?" My knee-jerk response to that is, "No, I can't do that." You know, so I am not the first guy in the door like Pete Wilson and these other guys do. Every time you ask Pete Wilson to do something, he's like, "Yes, yes, yes, I'll do it, yes." That's not me. That's not how my heart is bent. So that's my story. And I do have some table questions on the card there for you guys to discuss. But discuss these not out of any sense of guilt, any sense of, "Hey, I have to do this," because you don't. This whole thing in serving God is the option that he gives us. So let's talk about that around the table, and then we'll come back up at the end and see what the Lord has to say to all of us. Anybody ready to go to Togo? And it's not pizza Togo, it's Togo, it's a separate country. What came up around your table? Anybody? Jeff, speak up, brother. Here, hold on.
So I didn't want to come this morning, and I needed to come this morning. In 2014, I went to Angola State Penitentiary, and I met a guy who wants me to help tell his story. Ulysses Grant, or not, Ulysses, I can't remember his last name. And he reached out to me, and I don't want to go. I've told a story last year, and it didn't go the way I thought it would, and so I'm having a pity party. And he keeps reaching out to me on JPay, or whatever the inmate email, and he's screaming at me to tell the story, and the phone's ringing. And then you're like, it's bringing me to tears. I think I should answer the phone. So let's get together.
Awesome. The only prison I've been in America is Angola, and I went there 3 times, and it's a life-changing place right there. Yeah. If you're in Angola prison and your sentence is less than 40 years, you're a short-termer. Yeah, almost everybody dies in Angola. Yeah. Anybody else around the tables? This is not all about prison work, by the way. Sandy.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you, brother. Yeah, we had a great table today. We started with a 27-year-old to an 80-year-old. It's just, and it's amazing, and we talked about doing just the little things. You got a things to do list, and you got so much on there where you're overwhelmed, but making that decision to start out with the little things, the phone call, talking to your grandkids, the extra kiss to your wife, just helping people. Somebody calls you, talk to them on the phone, but go and meet them for lunch. That difference of helping a Christian brother, helping anybody, being the Good Samaritan. It's sacrifice, just like Peter says. But I think you get more out of it than the people you're helping. It comes back to you. And at the end of the night, I'm glad I did that. Johnny's going to go to Milwaukee to visit a friend. And, he doesn't want to fly. He doesn't want to go, but he's going to go. Because, you miss those opportunities if you don't make that step and to encourage other people and sacrifice it. But I love you guys. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Sandy. So I have a quote for you, and that is that serving God is not denying yourself. In your mind, you're denying yourself when you serve God. It's not denying yourself. It's denying your flesh. And there's a big difference between yourself and your flesh. We talked about that around our table. In fact, serving God may be the most satisfying thing you ever do, but it does not satisfy your flesh. So Sandy hinted at it, and Jeff did as well. But service begins with your family. Serve your family. Serve them well. I used to complain if somebody dropped something and left it, or they left dirty dishes. I don't ever do that anymore. I don't ever do it. I found out over the holidays, actually, that we don't have a trash can in our house. We have a trash cabinet. And so what happens is somebody will open the door and throw the trash in there. Some of it falls into the can. A lot of it doesn't fall into the can. And then they just close the door. Well, I'm the guy who picks up that trash, and my family's learning this now if they watch this video. I don't complain to anybody about that. Doesn't bother me. I don't care. I am there to serve my family. Servanthood is an attitude of your heart. It's an attitude of your heart. It's a decision. Stuart was talking about this. You have to decide in advance to be a servant, and God will make those calls to you. They're specific calls. It's not a call to everybody in the room to the same thing. If we all drive out of here and somebody out here has got a flat tire, it will not be helpful if 30 of us stop to help this person with their flat tire. It will not be. It'll be a specific call to you, specific opportunity, just like Jeff talked about. Don't expect reciprocity from the people that you serve. Serve people that can't pay you back. That's an awesome key of life. Don't expect reciprocity. Do expect, not transactionally, do expect reciprocity from God. When my son was young, he played on a football team. And I got to help coach. I was not the head coach, help coach his team. And so for years, Matt, I know you probably did all this stuff, but for years I sat on the sidelines with all these little kids, ready to get in the game, ready to go tackle. And some of the kids were scared to go into the game. They didn't want to get hurt. They didn't want to get tackled. And what was interesting is that during the game, we wanted to get as many kids in as we could. Every kid had to have so many plays in the game. And so I would stand on the sidelines, and I was a defensive coach. So all my defensive players were there. And some of them were ready to go in, and some of them weren't. Some of them were either on the bench, just sitting back there kind of cold and freezing. Some were throwing rocks into a stream over here somewhere, But some of them were eager. They were on the sidelines. They were ready to get into the game. And I think that's the picture that God has for us. I think he is the coach, and I think we choose to be either throwing rocks in the stream, sitting on the bench, which is our choice. We can do that. It's not a problem. Or we could be on the sidelines, ready to get into the game. And God will look at you. He'll tap your helmet, and that's your opportunity to get in the game, specifically for a specific purpose. So, David, do you have that picture that I gave you? So here's a picture of a guy. This was 12 hours ago. And if you can't tell who that is, that's Pete Wilson. And Pete Wilson is serving food to homeless people in Marietta. And this was 12 hours ago. And I was the guy who got into that trailer and kept bringing those two guys food to give out to the people. Now, I didn't do that so I had this picture. I only decided to take this picture when I was there. And to me, that's the heart of God. There were roughly 100 homeless people there. They're living alongside the interstate. And I'm not suggesting you guys need to go do this thing. You don't need to do that. But I watched Pete Wilson talk to every single homeless person that came up. And he'd be like, "Hey, what's your name?" I'd be like, "My name's Larry." And Pete would be like, "Larry, it's so good to see you. Thanks for being here, Larry." And I'm thinking, no, that guy shouldn't be here. He should be living in a house somewhere. But Pete just had the joy of the Lord as he was serving these people. And none of these people will ever serve Pete back. None of them will. But there was our guy, Pete Wilson, who then got up at whatever time he gets up to get here and prepare this room for our meeting this morning. And there's an opportunity where you can serve and you feel good about it. You don't have to do that thing. You don't have to do that thing. Just listen for the call. When the bat phone rings, pick up the phone and see what God would have you to do. See what he would have you to do. You don't have to go to Angola prison. You don't have to go to Africa. You don't have to do any of that. But I'm telling you that if God tells us and gives us a directive that we should do this, it only stands to reason that he will call you if your heart is right, your attitude is right, if you're prepared to serve. If you're prepared to serve, he will call you, answer the phone, and do that little thing. And remember, it's not denying yourself to go serve. It's denying your flesh. Don't let your flesh control you. We're not controlled by our flesh. We are not prisoners to our flesh. And it may be the most satisfying thing you do as a Christian. Anyhow, great to be with you guys. Thank you.